Hello, everyone. This is Tommy at World at War Comics. Thanks for joining us this week. We have an amazing guest, Tom Rasch, artist extraordinaire, worked for Marvel, and he has created all kinds of different worlds. But before we get into that, if you could give us a like, a subscribe, that really helps out the channel, and you could be up to date on all the great interviews that we're doing. We have amazing interviews that we have done and a lot more coming over the next few weeks. But yeah, Tom Rasch worked on Punisher 2099. In fact, he was the last artist to do so. And then we spent a lot of time on Black Alpha, which is one of his creations that he's been working on for the last 10 years. It's a whole universe that he's really built out. It's an amazing comic. If you're not reading it, you should. You could get it from WTF Comics. But yeah, let's get right into the interview. I think you're going to enjoy this one. Thanks, everyone. Well, welcome to the show, Tom. It's such a pleasure to meet you. I'm super excited to have a conversation with you.
Well, it's great to be on the show. I appreciate you having me here. So
I thought what we do, Tom, is let's just go way back and figure out where this passion for art came from. I think that would be fun. Like, when did you start drawing characters, and when did you know that comics was something that you really wanted to do?
Well, I've stated this quite a few times over the years, is that around 4 to 5 years old, a couple of significant things happened. I was my dad is an airman, Bob. My dad, Bob, is an airman. We were stationed over in Guam, and first things I saw on television were Batman, Spider-Man, and Star Trek all at the same time.
Yeah.
And then I noticed my mom, Maggie, is a wonderful artist, and so she had some drawings sitting around, and I would sit there and try and copy and doodle her drawings. And so learning art and learning about this amazing world of nerd culture, which has now become mainstream pop culture, was like really a pivotal milestone for me. And I tell people, between art and my love for these exceptional characters in the medium of comics and TV shows and movies, and et cetera, kind of forged a path for me that I instantly fell in love, and I never looked back. And it's still, true to this day. So
yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. So when did you start thinking about your own characters and figuring out little worlds that you wanted to eventually create for yourself? Did it start at a young age where you had little concepts that came to being?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I've said this before. I'm not sure if any creative kid or, people that like to doodle or draw, or people that are into comics, have the same experience. But, I mean, my first drawings were Batman and Spider-Man and the Enterprise. And so as a few years, and once we came back to the States, my mom started buying me comic books. And I had a memory of her buying me, I think it was a Neil Adams comic book. Mm-hmm. And I was completely blown away, because that Batman was different than the Adam West one I was used to on the TV show. And, it's kind of a darker thing. And his cape was like 20 feet long. And so I was kind of intrigued. And that Robin wasn't in that one. But that was my introduction also to comic books. So, of course, once my mom started buying those for me, and then we'd go visit my grandparents and my uncles who were teenagers at the time, they introduced me to Bruce Lee. And they had a huge stack of a box of comic books up in the attic at my grandma's house. So they would pull those out. And so I was also introduced to this amazing world of Marvel and DC, characters that I wasn't aware of, even stuff like Doc Savage or these pulp heroes, but Conan the Barbarian, Adam Warlock, Fantastic Four, I mean, all of these. And so besides already getting on the kick of drawing, I'd sit there and pull the comic books out and I'd start doodling. So of course I would mimic all these characters that I was enjoying. But after a while, I would also be like, hey, what if I kind of doodle one of my own characters? And in Black Alpha, which is kind of my premier character, I created him as a fifth grader. I was 11 years old, and I knew, that I wanted something that was a superhero in space, and I wanted him to have a spaceship like the Enterprise or the Batmobile as a kind of his hot ride. And it just kind of grew from there. And of course, that version compared to the version of what he is now, back then he was an atomic scientist named Adam Steele, Dr. Adam Steele, and he was in an accident like the Hulk.
Yeah.
That gave him the strength of 30 men. That was it. And he had the color scheme in the name, but he was in space and he had a spaceship. Well, the modern version has different from that slightly. It's a lot more what I pitch as Batman and Iron Man meets Star Wars, but that's kind of where it began. And then, a few years later, when I was getting into my teens, after seeing Raiders of the Lost Ark, and actually, obviously, Star Wars too eventually would have an influence on Black Alpha. But Raiders of the Lost Ark, I wanted to do my own pulp character. And then after a while, it just became a habit for me. Like all of a sudden, boom, and it still happens currently. Like I'll sit there, either a throwaway line from a movie or just randomly on its own, I'll get a seed of an idea. Will be like, oh, hey, it would be cool to do this.
Right.
I will say I have one character that I've been developing for a while because, Batman is so strong in influence. I will only say this much about it, is that I was inspired by when the Twilight movies first came out.
Uh-huh.
Very first trailer I remember seeing was that Bella, the character, was trying to figure out, is it Edward or whatever, Team Edward. I'm trying to remember the main lead, but she was trying to figure out why she noticed the weird supernatural things about him, and she goes, "Well, it's not kryptonite, it's not a radioactive spider bite." So she was kind of implying like superhero.
Yeah.
And from that throwaway line, and this happened some years later, I'm like, what if I actually combine the two genres of vampires and superheroes? And so my premise is, what if Dracula were Batman or vice versa? So see, sometimes there's a line, and then all of a sudden
Sure.
I'm like, there's a nugget of an idea that I can explore and develop. So
That's
it can happen randomly, and I have so many characters and universes and their lives living in my head that it gets pretty cramped sometimes. But it's like I can't stop it. It's
yeah.
part of
Yeah.
who I am. And I guess, I always tell people when I was a young child, I always had 4 or 5 goals I wanted to do. I wanted to be a starship captain.
Yeah.
That was number one.
Yeah.
And then a little bit later on, I wanted to be a rock star. I wanted to be an artist. I wanted to be a filmmaker.
Yeah.
I wanted to draw comic books, and these were all roughly around like, mid-grade school years. And I think I didn't realize it at the time, but I guess I found my calling,
Yeah.
being a storyteller. And
Yeah.
so, and there's been a lot of ups and downs through the years, and and there's a lot of disappointments that go with that. But I guess it's, if anything, I tell people I'm a huge proponent of what storytelling represents in culture. I mean, you hear about the old cave drawings.
Yeah.
And I feel like the number one thing that pushes culture forward and pushes our species forward is the sharing of ideas.
Yeah.
And so in a number of ways, we can get those in various forms. And that's the thing that will continue us to grow culturally, globally.
Yeah.
And I feel like comic books and entertainment and anything like that is another kind of form of that. And people can be inspired to live their own hero's journey.
Yep.
That's what I've had to apply it to myself almost through my entire life, to get through the rough spots and either put yourself in the shoes of these heroes you admire, or, or whatever the case is, to kind of move forward. And so for me, I've accepted that despite the rough times that we all have, and I wish at times I could have picked a simpler path for myself, but I have to honor who I am. And so I've learned that I'm like, there's going to be highs and lows and disappointments and milestones and wins, but in the end, I wouldn't have it any other way. So
yeah, that's incredible, Tom. Wow. I got chills, my friend.
Oh, cool.
That's amazing. Yeah.
That's me preaching from the pulpit of storytelling. So
yeah. But I mean, you could see the passion that you have for it, and really how it's been such a big portion of your life, and it's real. And I think everyone could feel that. So I appreciate you sharing that with us. That's amazing. That's amazing.
Well, interestingly enough, I've had several things happen, especially in the last 10 years where, Black Alpha, I got Black Alpha out in the public eye. I made a choice about 10 years ago, because when I would do comic conventions and I was a guest, they'd want to kind of come see my work with what was already established. I drew for Marvel for some time, and then, I'd sell prints of the Hulk and Wolverine or whatever. And I knew that I decided, I'm like, I think it's time for me to kind of utilize the platform of being out, with the public and trying to promote my own intellectual properties and material. And I knew that was a bit of a jumping off a ledge, because there's a bit of a vulnerability, which is, well, people like my work. They don't know my character versus over the brand names that have been around literally for decades. And I'm like, but I do remember, it being out there, and then within a short amount of time, and because of stuff like Facebook, I started getting all these opportunities rolling in quickly. People were interested in trying to develop it as a TV show, a cartoon, or a movie. I had some stuff. I was featured in USA Today almost 10 years ago. I had some of my Black Alpha toy prototypes and T-shirts and posters were on the Big Bang Theory.
Yeah.
And that to me kind of showed that my instincts were correct, that maybe I had something worth sharing with an audience that hopefully would strike a chord. So, and since that time, I've actually had a few of my other projects have also at least 7 characters and IPs I have in the public eye. I've had interest from producers in Hollywood.
Wow.
One for a while, which is unfortunately been shelved at the moment. Another character, the one that I brought up earlier, that was like my Indiana Jones, Salem Tusk, as his name was, has been developed as an independent action film for the last 4 years.
Wow.
And so it's not just one character; it's several of my characters.
Wow.
And so that's at least a good validation that what you have, like I said, at least has some merit.
Sure. Yeah.
And that's kind of the disappointments that go along with that, though, is that you realize if you decide to forge this path of getting in the Hollywood arena, it's not as cut and dried as maybe the kid in me would have thought. You know what I mean? Like because you can't. It's hard to segregate or separate your passion of like the kid in you that's so excited about creating material, and then the process of bringing it to light or to life is a whole other process. And then, comic books are even can be difficult just in themselves.
Sure.
I tell people, I said, it's a lot of work that goes into creating a simple comic book. So imagine trying to get it out there to meeting up with strategic partners like producers, et cetera, to get a whole TV show project or a film. I mean, that's a lot of moving parts there. And so a lot of times things get derailed.
Yeah.
And I've kind of run into that over the last 10 years and I've taken my lumps. But like I said earlier, at the end of the day, I pretty much just kind of remind myself, this, and I have a young daughter, I have a 4-year-old named Ari, and this is part of the legacy I want to leave for her. Is Dad gave it his best shot. So in light with all that being said, a few years ago, we started filming a documentary, and the subject of the documentary was me at my age, not giving up on any of this stuff. And having a young daughter to what that'll represent to her, you know what I mean? And so she's a big part of the narrative of my life anyway, the most important part.
Sure.
And that's what I want to show her. So one time I had a couple of years ago, as she's getting older, more aware, I always get choked up when I relay this to people, is that one time she's walking past my computer and she sees all 7 of my characters lined up and she goes, superheroes. And then she points to one of my female characters named Evelyn 11, and she goes, I want to be her for Halloween.
Wow,
I mean, so the
awesome.
fact that hasn't sunk in that Dad has created these.
But
I mean, and she because they were my brain children for years before she came along and became my actual child. But I said, there's no other feeling in the world knowing that your kid appreciates what you're doing without even kind of fully realizing it yet, so that's a big, great memory for me. And, and I've got posters of the Salem Tusk movie, on her wall in her bedroom, and her mom put it up. And then also like, there's a big cutout of Black Alpha when you walk in the house of her mom's place, and it's behind her. And she, she's got her own little Black Alpha ship. I made a 3D print that I gave to her, you know what I mean? So she's got things that hopefully when she gets older, she'll think it's cool that, Dad uses imagination a lot. So
no doubt, Tom, no doubt that'll happen. That's incredible. I mean, I got 4 children, and in a small way I could relate, right? Because you certainly want your kids to be proud of what you've been able to accomplish, and you want to leave a legacy like that for them. And I'm so happy for you that you're able to do that. And no doubt your daughter will, I mean, she already appreciates it, right? If she could point at your screen and say, that's who I want to be, there's already an appreciation there, right? So that's, wow. Incredible.
Well, I'm excited too, because if things work out later this month, I get to be show and tell at our preschool. And so I'm going to come and talk to class and bring comic books and give a little drawing demonstration and talk to the kids about art and comics and stuff like that. Cool, and so hopefully she'll be proud.
Oh yeah, no doubt. No doubt. That's amazing. Wow, Tom, I don't know how to pivot from that, man. That's pretty deep, man. Maybe we could jump into like, what was the first thing that you did in comics for like either for yourself or for Marvel, where you actually put it on paper and you started to develop your own comic, or the art for a comic?
So when I was in my mid-teens, there was a magazine out, and this is really the early 80s, and it was called Comic Scene. And there was another magazine I religiously read, which is Starlog. And I do believe it was the same producing team, and they also put out Fangoria, did Comic Scene. And so I just devoured that every time it'd come out every month. And so it gave articles about upcoming books. It really introduced me to the independent comic scene, ironically too, because like I was slightly aware there was a few books out in the late 70s and the very early 80s that these kind of like startup companies that were producing books like ElfQuest, a number of other titles, but Comic Scene introduced me to the world of creator-owned comics and independent comics. And so when I started reading about how things, because that's how my brain works, I'm always curious, how do we get from point A to point B? How do we make the soup? Like all the ingredients. And I would want to know, how does somebody become a comic book artist?
Right.
Same thing with movies, like how does somebody become a filmmaker? So anyway, I would start reading these articles, and And so at that point, because, I knew I was on my path of what I wanted to do, I started actually, I wasn't drawing on the correct size paper, any of that stuff, but I would use pencils and magic marker. And I would take some of my characters and I started initially doing them in a comic strip format.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So around 14 or so, I had this character with a pretty lame name of the Blue Avenger. And he was supposed to be another Indiana Jones pulp character. And I decided to have a scene where he's fighting some Nazi bad guys set in the 1930s. And so I did it as a 3 or 4 panel strip.
Uh-huh.
And that was the beginning of it, because I figured, well, that'll kind of get the notion of what it's like to sort of construct your scenes, how to lay them out.
Yeah.
And then from about a year or so later, I started doing like a full page of another character of mine, Jonah Smith. He was kind of like, I don't know if you're familiar with the Warlord.
No, I'm not. No.
The Warlord was a character that came out in the 70s. It was, like during the 70s, like Conan and fantasy style characters were really popular. And this particular character was a huge influence on me. And I wanted to do a character like that. It's like a character who's like a stranger in a strange land. And in the case of the Warlord, he was an Air Force colonel, I believe, who gets shot down in a spy plane. He ends up in this land in the middle of the earth, kind of like Journey to the Center of the Earth, called Skataris. So he's got modern technology, like he's got guns and explosives, but he's basically dealing like in a sort of a Conan fantasy realm.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was my introduction to fantasy. So I'm like, okay, I want to do this character. And so I started drawing this Jonah Smith character where he's walking into a tavern and he's being monitored by some dark figure in the corner of the tavern. And there was just a thrill to that. Like, this like, here it is. I'm breathing life to the stuff up here. And I'm actually putting it down on paper in story form, as opposed to simple one-off drawings or pinups, that kind of stuff. And so, in fact, I was so passionate about it that I had my first quote unquote girlfriend at that time. And that meant she was calling my parents' house 20 times a day, And I remember after the first couple of days, I thought it was really cool that she was interested, because I didn't think I'd ever get a girlfriend. And she called and she would be like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "I'm drawing comic books. Leave me alone." So that's how I knew how passionate I was, because I'd see stories where somebody goes, "Well, yeah, I got into drawing, or I got into comics and I discovered girls," and then that went by the wayside. And I'm like, "Nope, never happened with me."
It's a complete opposite for me.
Never replaced. Anyway, but so that's how I knew that this is something I'm passionate about. So around 16 or 17, there started being articles in comic scene about people who had questions. How do you get into comic books?
Yeah.
And how do you do this? And so I started reading articles about like people getting samples together and submitting, I guess, packages off to like an editor that worked for Marvel and DC. They were the big two then. They're still kind of the big two. And on a side note, the first comic book I forgot to mention is that literally changed my life, because I started collecting it. I started buying for myself on my own. I would take my bicycle and ride down to the local grocery store once a month. It was the X-Men.
Yeah.
And it was John Byrne and Chris Claremont and Terry Austin. And that was the book, another one that changed my life, where I was so not only about the characters, I started noticing artistic styles that drew me to the book. And so that was another where I'm like, I love John Byrne. He's my rock star hero in the comic book artist realm. I want to do what he does. And so I started learning things. But because I was a very shy kid, I'm not now, I'm not a shy person, but back then I was extremely shy. So it took me a while when I would learn to maybe forget how things were done, but to execute them and put them into a plan.
Right.
It took a number of years. And so it went from like my late teens until my very early 20s to sort of take the courage to go, I'm going to go to comic book convention and show off my work. And so the very first one I went to was San Diego Comic-Con.
Oh, wow.
And that was before it blew up and, what it is now. But it was actually the summer of '89. It was the summer that the Michael Keaton Batman came out.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So I went there with my work. And it's interesting because nowadays I see people on Facebook that will share their work, and they're so used to getting, and I'm all for being supportive, right?
Yeah.
But they're so used to their friends and their family telling them how amazing their work is. And a lot of times to me, it's rough around the edges. And
sure. Yeah.
And I think because of that, sometimes the quality of their progression suffers. So, so back then when I went to the San Diego Comic-Con, it was like Shangri-La to me. I mean, like I was so excited to see these artists that I'd been reading about or that I followed their work for years, and they're there at a table, sketching in front of me. And long story short, though, there was portfolio review lines, and I learned about that. So I went to DC. First one I went and sought out, and saw there was several gentlemen ahead of me that had their portfolios of comic books, and I'd be peering over their shoulder. And I got really scared because I'm like, wow, these guys are really good and they're getting torn to shreds. They're not
Oh,
getting
wow.
work. They're not getting offered a job. And so I tucked tail and ran.
Oh,
I
yeah.
left. I left the convention center that day, went back to my room and hung out and figured out
Yeah.
what am I going to do. So I went ahead and collected my courage, went to the next day, went back to DC, and I immediately got shot down.
Yeah.
And then I worked my way down the list. I went to Marvel, got shot down, went down to smaller companies, got shot down. So it was pretty deflating. And then towards the end of that con, I reached out to an artist. I started going around the third day, and I would seek people out that I followed their work and asked them if they would take a look at my work. And one of them was Carl Kessel, who was an inker on John Byrne's Superman run in the 80s on DC. And I liked his inking style. So he actually gave me encouragement and said, hey, have you ever thought about being an inker? He goes, you got some of your rendering and your line work is dialed in.
Yeah.
So he gave me kind of that lifeline that I think I needed. And so he gave me some information, and I connected with some editors at both Marvel and DC, and I got samples to ink over. And of course I did these samples, and I started thinking, I'm like, I really want to be a penciler though.
Yeah.
And I remember what Carl told me at the convention, where he goes, you're trying too hard to kind of be clever with your storytelling and your panels, your layouts, etc. So he gave me the 5 basics, and I went ahead and took those and decided to apply them for the next couple of years and work on my samples, and always have, copies ready if an editor asks. So anyway, so there was about a 3-year gap between my first time going to my first Comic-Con, getting shot down.
Yeah.
The next time I went back and approached, I went with 2 very good buddies of mine. And so I decided to seek out DC again.
Yeah.
Follow my trajectory.
Yeah.
I walked up to there, and the first words out of their mouth were, "Are you working for anybody, Tom?"
Oh, wow.
And that's how the rest of the convention went.
Wow.
And so for me, it felt great to get that validation from, like, you need to get a career in truck driving the first time. Look at that, maybe this isn't meant for you and so I went ahead and connected with a lot of great people that con and got tons of contact info. And so from the convention, and originally I was supposed to possibly drawing for Malibu, and within a few months time span, they were actually acquired by Marvel. So I got a phone call just a few months later. It was in November of, I believe it was early 90s, so maybe 92 or 93. It was an editor from Marvel. Called me up and left a message saying, hey, I'd like to talk to you about possibly working for Mighty Marvel Comics.
Wow.
And so I got put on the Punisher 2099 title. I was actually the last artist on the book.
Yeah.
But I'm saying that, the thrill that I had, and there was a dichotomy going on, because I was also, my family had a band, and we traveled on the road with the band. So I had this weird existence of like being in a band, meeting girls, and drawing. And so while I was on the road, I actually drew my pages for Marvel, and I would FedEx them off to my editor.
Wow. That's incredible. Man.
But I equated to the thrill of an actor that has had a dream his whole life of being like cast in a TV show or movie.
Yeah.
It's the exact same thing, within the heart. And so,
sure.
But I also learned too that, I got in when the market was kind of bottoming out. It was volatile. So just because you got your foot in the door, and this applies to anything, doesn't mean you're going to stay there. It takes a lot of hard work. And so what ended up happening was my 2 friends that I went to the first San Diego Comic-Con, they ended up getting jobs and careers in the video game industry. And so they were kind of recommending maybe I should try that out. And so, and here's the funny thing is I don't give up.
Yeah.
So anything I want to do,
if
it takes years to get there, I stick with it. It's not always easy. So the same thing with the video game industry. I got my foot in the door with that one later in the game. Yeah. And so that's what I was saying earlier. Like everything I wanted to do isn't a simple, like, you fill out a resume, you fill out a job application, to drop it off. You get, you get pulled in for an interview, you get hired. Everything is a lot of timing and luck and getting your foot in the door. So with that particular opportunity, and what my friends told me, they said, you're a salaried employee, you have benefits, and the money was quite honestly much better than comic books. And so I decided, well, I'll try this instead. And I ended up getting my first gig because I was so hungry for it. I had to compete with 100 other people.
Wow.
And then I had to make it into a top 10. And then I had to make it into a top 3. And our top 3 had to have an artist test. And I stayed up for 3 days straight getting this art test done for the video game studio that I would eventually get hired by.
Wow.
So that's what I would tell people. Everything that I do, there's always a lot of bumps in the road, but I guess I hang in there. And even with like sorry, I moved my computer.
You're okay.
Black Outfit's the same thing. I've had a lot of bumps in the road with this Hollywood experience, but I'm still hanging in there trying to make things happen. And, you know, with the comic book and, you know, which is, I partner with the guys at WTF Comics. I know you had John, the CFO on there recently. And those guys have been a great boon to helping me get things back on track with the Black Alpha comic. Cause normally I was a one-man show for the most part. And trying to get a comic produced. I mean, I had a couple of artists that I worked with. At one time I was in a position to pay one of my artists when I was working at video games, but you know, that's changed since then. And so I had the hardest time trying to accept that sometimes you need to be able to let people in. And so meeting with Jack and those guys at WTF, they constructed the Kickstarter almost 2 years ago. And that Kickstarter was a success. And we're currently wrapping up issue 2 of Black Alpha, but I'm so grateful for those guys to actually make this a reality, because I've had such a loyal fan base that have hung in there for 10 years now. From when I first started issue 1 to all the stuff that's gone on with the movies and the TV show stuff that hasn't, you know, materialized yet, to like, I had to recognize and kind of circle back around about like comic books are an amazing medium. And I think I was being, going to the dark side a little bit about being kind of distracted by the glamour of what a TV show or movie could be. And I had to remind myself that story is amazing in any form. If you're writing a prose, you know, novel, comic books, poems, it doesn't matter. And so I had to re-embrace the idea that I owe it to my audience that's been following what I've been doing to get the Black Alpha story out to them. You know what I mean? Because a lot of them have hung in there. And so I'm like, well, and so because of Jack and John and the rest, it's finally happening. And so I'm grateful for that. And we're planning on launching a third crowdfunder for Black Alpha, hopefully in the near future here. And we'd ideally like to get issues 3 and 4 done. It's a 4-issue miniseries. And the way that the story is constructed is I equated to each miniseries would be like a novel or film. It's got like things are wrapped up. There's slightly a couple of loose ends that could segue into a second series, but because this has been a thing kind of just hanging over my head for years, I would just like to just get a 4-issue miniseries done. And if that's all that ever happened, I would be happy with that. So
well, that's super exciting to hear. I know I heard from John when I was speaking to him that issue 2 will be around the corner soon. So I got really excited about that. But maybe we could spend a little bit more time on Black Alpha, because the detail, and I think I mentioned to you last week, the detail is incredible. And so obviously, knowing how long that you've had this in your heart to release, you've probably added to that world and built up that world over time. And I was just impressed. I mean, the language that you created, everything about Black Alpha is impressive, Tom. I mean, it's very well done and very detailed. It's incredible.
Well, I've always had this philosophy that I wear my influences on my sleeve. I create what I love and what I know. And I remember as a kid, I remember being in 2nd or 3rd grade, and I found the Making of Star Trek book. And so, you know, there's all this stuff in there, but I was mainly so young that I was more intrigued by the visual aspects. And so, you know, and they had like these layouts of the Enterprise and how big it was compared to an aircraft carrier. And then that in Star Trek, I learned, you know, there's this whole other world behind the show. And I think that kind of created the interest in like, oh, it's not just about Captain Kirk and Spock and the Enterprise crew. There's, you know, 12 other ships like the Enterprise and the fleet and the workings of Starfleet, et cetera. And then Star Wars, in a way, kind of did the same thing when that came out, because you'd get these lines of dialogue. And it always hinted at a larger world. So for me, because I would be so deeply entrenched in these stories and these mythologies, because they become very real, not just in here, but also in my heart. And I'm like, and sort of figuring out the engineering behind that is the world building is so in depth that it does become that much more real to the audience member. And so with my own materials, I've done the same thing where I'm like, you know, I'm just going to take, I call it applying my fresh coat of paint, and what Star Trek and Star Wars has done on the world building. And I'm like, I've applied it to all my IP, but especially Black Alpha. Like Black Alpha has a ship. It's called the Artemis 7. It's like, you know, his Batmobile, Millennium Falcon Enterprise. And so I've got deck plans for that. I've got other ships.
That's
from
cool.
Kind of that line of ships with different classes. Like you said, I created my own alien alphabet, which was an idea that I got from an old late 70s Micronauts comic book where they had the citizens of the microverse had their own alphabet. So I'm going to do my version of that. And so everything that I've done is just kind of what I love as a fan, where I'm like, I've got names of all my different alien races in my story.
Yeah.
There's things I have written down in notebooks that are like, I have star maps where the majority of my story takes place in.
Yeah.
I have little hints of events that my characters will refer to,
Yeah.
that have affected their culture.
Mhm.
Because one thing that has been lost, I feel like in the modern age, because we're so used to like just being lambasted by the amazing VFX that we see in movies and the Marvel's
Yeah.
Avengers movies, so that
Yeah.
they're able to show everything. I miss the days when like, classic couple of lines out of the first Star Wars movie is when Obi-Wan is explaining to Luke about the history of the Jedi Knights,
Yeah.
or the scene where Han Solo is talking about doing the Kessel Run in less than 12 parsecs in the cantina,
Yeah.
or even telling him that it's a fast ship. There's a line of dialogue where he says, I'm talking about the big Carillion ships, not the local bulk cruisers or something. And so that, to me, exposition can fill in the theater of
Yeah.
your mind.
Sure.
And so I'm a believer in that sometimes, even if you never see these things in a story, if your character references it, it can kind of create a moment of
Yeah.
history for you as the audience member and reader, or viewer. And so like, and I even have a couple of phrases that one of them would be like, what in the nine moons is what kind of a faction of pirates, space pirates, say in my
Uh-huh.
story.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you'll realize that there's a language that, it's like their way of saying what in the world, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's another example of world building, where in this universe, these characters all have a phrase they're familiar with.
Yeah.
There's a scene in Black Alpha where Trandon, my lead character, ends up
Uh-huh.
discovering the ship that he's going
Uh-huh.
to use. And the synthetic robot acolyte starts giving him information about the ship. And he says,
Yeah.
oh yeah, I've seen one of these in a museum when I was a kid. I'm surprised this old rust bucket is still together. That's my way of talking about, the Millennium Falcon, like the 12
Yeah.
parsecs line.
Yeah.
And it's just thrilling for me to kind of have that, that, like I
Yeah.
said, it's like you're creating an entire universe, literally,
Yeah.
with its own history and cultural foundations and cultural traditions.
Mm-hmm.
And these characters kind of get to live in that world. And so
Yeah.
for me, like I said, I'm just, once again, and I'll be honest with you, I mean, since I grew up loving the things that I've loved,
Yeah.
the term franchise has been tossed around quite a bit in the last 10 or 20 years of the Star
Yeah.
Wars franchise, the DC and Marvel franchise. I'm
Sure.
doing my version of that because, like, to
Yeah.
try and get investors involved, you
Yeah.
basically say, you don't just make it a one-off, you
Yeah.
make it so that it can transcend and be a multi-platform,
Mm-hmm.
intellectual property. So it can be cartoons and toys and books and novels and role-playing games and board
Yeah.
games and video games and everything else. And so I've built, and especially Black Alpha, to be
Yeah.
able to be utilized in that space. So with that being said, I had a friend reach out to me about a decade ago, and we've been trying to develop a board game of Black Alpha, because it's not even about our main characters in the comic book. It's about
Uh-huh.
an offshoot of characters that have their own little story going on.
That's
But
awesome.
that's what you do, is you make the property the star. You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Yeah.
And whatever, you can do like stories that take place 1,000 years in the past,
Yeah.
1,000 years in the future, that
Yeah.
are all the connective tissue is this universe you've created. So
Wow, man. You're all over it, Tom. You're all over it. And
well,
that's
and I was saying,
incredible.
when I get to yammering, I can still hear the 12-year-old in me, or 11-year-old, getting so
Yeah,
excited about, the
for
tournaments
sure.
and everything. So
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the driving factor, right? Is that first feeling that we had in trying to fulfill that. I mean, as a fan, right? I don't have your skill set, but I'm a fan, and I love to read those type of things. And when you walk through that, it brings a lot of emotion out, even as a reader, right? And like you said, there's certain things that are said, whether it's in Black Alpha or any other comic book that someone's reading, where maybe there is a line, and then you could develop that even in your own mind, and now you're part of that universe as you're reading it. And I think those are the things that we make connections as fans that want us to come back, and we're super excited for issue 2, because in our mind we could think of all different kind of directions, and we want to know, okay, what is the direction in issue 2, because we're super excited about that.
well, and I can say this, that like the story that I've been wanting to do with actually any of my characters, I want them to have a lot of heart and depth.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what moves me as a fan of storytelling.
Sure.
I love sometimes the really subtle line,
Yeah.
what some people might consider throwaway line, or the character moments of a heart-to-heart talk.
Sure.
That my goal would be is to sort of, you ride along on the shoulders of these characters like you do in movies and TV shows, and that, you might be moved to tears by
Yeah.
what you read because of what one character is having, you know, a particular struggle. And so that's been goal number one, is that I want to tell a very human story. And I will say this, you know, like I said, I've described in USA Today, Black Alpha is, what if you took the Batman story, you sprinkled in Iron Man tech, and you dropped it off in the middle of Star Wars?
Yeah.
But I wanted to take kind of the basic components of the superhero myth.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of times they're orphaned, they lose a family or family members. And I wanted to give my character have a little more depth, is that not only did he lose a family, but he lost a younger brother.
Yeah.
And I literally lost my own younger brother a year and a half ago. So I've decided to name Trandon's younger brother after Michael, as my brother passed away, and I named him after him as a tribute. But in a weird sort of way, I get to go through my own version of that now in real life, as my character does in the story, about to take those difficulties and how do you always forge ahead and carry on, you know. And that's really what I hope to instill upon anyone who's interested in following my stories, is that hopefully they're inspired. It's like passing the torch. And I always say, you know, as an independent comic creator, when your thing is brand new and it's out there and you're taking those emotional risks, you know, in the public eye, that having somebody draw a pinup of your original character, there's no feeling like it. Like they're actually, you know, what came from your brain.
Yeah.
They're doing and I've had a number of people now the last 10 do their own pinups of the Black Alpha character.
Yeah.
But, you know, and I have my toys, I have action figures, and I have prototypes of the ship, and I have t-shirts and everything that goes with it.
Yeah.
And to see all of those being brought to life with your independent character, your original character, I don't know. And I did do a little research on you too. So looks like you have a book that you guys were just having a campaign for, right?
Yeah.
Is that your first one out of the gate?
First one out of the gate. You know, I've had the story like you, not as long as you, but I've had the story in the back of my mind for a few years. And I actually had a kidney transplant last year in September. And so I had like 4 months off of work. And to be honest, after a month, I was very bored. And so it's just me and my wife. I have older kids. So I said, well, why not just do it now? I have this 3 months off of work where I could really dedicate to the story and put it on paper. I'm not an artist, so I work with a young man named Day. And he was able to take the story and put it into art form by page. And yeah, it should be done this week. And the Kickstarter ends actually today. And if, you know, hopefully we'll be able to go to print here very quick and fulfill all those orders. So super excited to get into the world, but I'm 30 years behind you, my friend. I could only hope to have a little smidgen of your success, but at the end of the day, right, it's a passion. I love comic books, and whether it works or not, I could say, hey, I did it. And I threw it out there. And like you said, you're putting your work out there for the world to kind of look at. And I'm sure I'll get a lot of feedback, and I'll know if it's something that I'm good enough to move forward with, you know?
Well, and I feel like regardless of when that journey begins for anybody, it doesn't matter. It's just, it's that first step forward and getting it, like I said, bringing it to life and bringing it to light. And I feel like the reason I brought up those too is that, you know, if you're ever interested, I can hook you up with some contacts, because what's really cool about this current age that we live in, people can do 3D prints of their characters, or they can find someone to model their character, or custom action figure guys, or have their companies. So if you ever want custom action figures, your story, you know, I can hook you up with some contacts, because that is so much fun, because you don't have to wait around for like a big toy deal anymore. To get these things created. So, you know, that's one thing I was going to say. Yeah. I mean, it's probably the closest thing that I tell people I feel to being a birth mother, you know, is actually like watching what I've given life to, even with some help, you know, being sprung into 3D form, you know, in reality and stuff like that. So I highly recommend it. But I mean, I'm always very much a big cheerleader of anyone doing what we're doing. I try and encourage it as much as possible, because I feel like in these times, which have been difficult and a bit rough, I mean, we need positivity.
Yeah, agree.
We need people adding and contributing to the world. And if it's in cool comic book stories as one part of that spectrum, you know, so be it. I think that there's only good that can come out of that, really. Because like I said, I don't think you realize from like things webbing out from an initial starting point and then, you know, basically expanding, you know, you don't know the influence that someone can have, you know. I was talking to a friend who runs a comic convention that I'm going to be doing as a guest here a few months. I went over to his house for dinner a couple of weeks. When we talk about like the influence that nerd culture can bring to someone, can change someone's life, literally, can save a life. And that's huge.
Yeah.
somebody who's struggling with depression or whatever,
Mhm.
something that can give them a light to kind of, maybe
Yeah.
get them going in a different direction, I think is obviously a good thing. So, and that's why, like, even in Black Alpha, that's really what his story is about, is, like I
Yeah.
said, I want him to be relatable, is that, he will experience things that most of us should and have, and unfortunately will,
Yeah.
but he just happens to be in another star system, in a land far, far away,
Yeah.
galaxy far, far away, basically.
Yeah.
But I want his story. In fact, one of my friends who was writing the comic, we were talking about, like, we should have a scene where, instead of Trandon being taken out by his father to learn how to drive the family car, he's
Yeah.
being taken out to learn how to drive the family spaceship.
That's cool.
You know what I mean? And but just
Yeah.
everything can just be applicable. It's just a change of setting and stuff like that. So
Yeah. No, that's amazing, man. Amazing, Tom. Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, I agree with you that at least comic books for me was an escape as a child, right? And so, if there's someone out there suffering, I guarantee that comic books is probably doing the same thing for them. You enter into another world. It's not the world or the reality that you're currently in, right? It's this other reality that you could experience, and it can be escape for a lot of people. And I've obviously loving comic books for 35 years, 40 years almost. You meet a lot of people where I do think comic books, and any other kind of art form, right, probably has the same impact, but comic books for sure, because you're entering this other world, you can't escape the one that you're in. And I do think that it has saved a lot of people. I know it's been a huge impact in my life as a fan of comic books, and folks like you, Tom, that are able to help create these worlds or maintain these worlds that have already been developed as an artist, whatever that is. It's helped a lot of people for sure. And again, now it's like you said, it's more mainstream, as 30 years ago was definitely more nerd culture, right? In fact, sometimes you didn't tell everybody that you were into comic books, and now it's just so mainstream that with the Marvel movies and the $1 billion that they've done, now everyone loves comic books, right? So it's kind of weird to look around and you're like, it's not the same as it was 30 years ago, but it's great. I mean, it's provided a lot of opportunity for people.
well, yeah, I mean, like, it's been an interesting trajectory. Like I said, people that have been there more from the beginning, I mean, I used to joke, only semi-joke, like I said earlier, that, I didn't, not that I was ashamed of it. I just think that because I was so shy and kind of cut off from, I guess, forming at least, real friendships early on in my life, that I remember thinking, well, I want to go on a date. I want to be able to kiss a girl. I want, you know what I mean? I'm like, these things won't happen if I tell people I'm into this stuff. Although I do have one friend that I'm friends with on Facebook still. She was openly into comic books when we were in high school, and she'll comment and stuff still. So she was really cool. Still is cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that it's been, and I'm not exclusive either. Like, the fact that the more mainstream audiences embrace the stuff that I consider supremely awesome, I'm not angry about that. I'm not bitter. I'm just glad people kind of eventually jump on board, and I'll never be resentful towards that. So
for sure.
And like you said, it's storytelling, it's comics, it's movies, it can be a song for people. And for me, with my love of Star Trek and my introduction to sci-fi, to this day, Captain Kirk is still my number one idol. And I still go to him to be like, you know what, I'm having a rough day.
Yeah.
Captain Kirk is responsible for the lives of 430 crew members.
Yeah.
And he's got to be strong, but he can be vulnerable in front of McCoy. I still utilize that as a moment to go, okay, what would Captain Kirk do?
Yeah.
And he can be vulnerable, but at this time he has to rise up and he has to be strong to get through this moment.
Yeah.
And I do that with a lot of characters. Certain days I'm Batman, certain days I'm Kirk, certain days I'm Peter Parker, whatever it is. And I obviously, once again, Spider-Man is such a popular character because he sort of started that template of, this is your next door neighbor.
Yeah.
He's not a handsome sun god from another planet raised in Kansas, and he's not a billionaire.
Yeah.
He's you.
Yeah.
And that's why even as much as I pitch Black Alpha as Batman and Iron Man meets Star Wars, it's got several other influences of DNA. Peter Parker is a strong one in there because Trandon, my lead character, is like your next door neighbor. He grows up in a poor section of the star system he lives in. He's got the drive of what happened to him. And actually, in a little bit of a Peter Parker type twist, Trandon, when he gets these abilities because of this suit that he's given that augments his abilities, he doesn't use it to do heroic things initially, like Peter Parker did not. And ultimately his Uncle Ben died because of his foolishness and immaturity and selfishness. So so there's that in there, and the ship being the Aramis is. I also love the Three Musketeers. That's been one of my favorite stories since I was a kid, and so the idea of like kind of a noble guard that serves a king or a monarch. I mean, some of this finds its way all in the mythology of Black Alpha, and so the influences are there. But ultimately, like I said, I want people to be able to walk away going, I feel for that person, or I feel for those characters, and I know what they go through. That's my number one goal, and like I said, that's why when I work with my writers, and that's one thing when you talk about it, like a skill set. I'm the world builder. I create them, but I'm not a writer by trade. I don't write. I can come up with plot points. I can kind of steer direction of plot, but I've worked with some really good writers over the last several years, screenwriters. That give my characters their voices and really bring that world to life. And even as a content creator, what I tell people is when you collaborate, it's like you get to be an audience member because you sort of get to see things that you weren't anticipating. When you create this world. And so when somebody comes up with a great scene or a line of dialogue and it's nothing you would have considered, it's so much fun to kind of get that zing of like, wow, that's awesome. It's like you get to be that audience member going, oh, that was amazing or whatever. So I'm appreciative of that. But in any form, like I said, that's really what I want my legacy to be, is that I didn't give up. And I learned to adjust my goals and dreams as I got older. And like I said, drawing for Marvel was a big one since I was a kid, but now I'm actually living my even larger and ultimate dream, which is to create my own universe of characters. And if anybody, who watches your podcast, I'm on Facebook. And so I tell people they can look it up under Tom Rasch. Last name is spelled R-A-S-C-H. And I love for people to friend request me. I love connecting with everyone, but I will say that, for me, I hope I inspire people. I'm constantly inspired, and I just, like I said, I want to keep that thread going and pass the torch and say, do something with purpose in your life. So,
well, that's super amazing, Tom. I mean, someone like you and opening up like that could be a huge mentor for other people that are really entering the industry for the first time. And, you have so much experience and you've accomplished so much and you're not done yet. It sounds like you got a lot of great plans for Black Alpha. What else do you have going on outside of Black Alpha? Is your main focus right now today really around Black Alpha and finishing that 4-part series, I assume?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the in front of me. The current focus is to get issue 2 done and then continue moving the comic along to its 4-issue conclusion. And then we'll see how things go after that. I'm currently working with Jack Egan, who's another I think you might be interviewing him too, if I'm not mistaken. Him and I are collaborating on another character of mine called the Bondsman, which I created in the early 90s. It was very inspired by Image. He kind of looks like Spawn, kind of those characters. And so him and I have been hammering out that story as kind of a graphic novel one-shot. And that'll be probably after we get Black Alpha going and back on trajectory. We'll be working on that. And then like I said, my Salem Test character was being developed for a film, an independent movie, and I've been working with Bishop Stevens, who's a former WCW, WWE wrestler, and he's been acting in a number of films. And so he's supposed to be playing the title character. But, there can be a number of things that sort of, kind of another bump in the road. And so we're dealing with that currently. So for the moment, that movie's been shelved, at least for the time being. So with that being said, I'm actually playing around with the idea of also doing a Salem Test graphic novel, or at least a prose novel with spot illustrations, because that's kind of the era that it comes from. And then, like I have another character, Evel 11, that, same thing. Like, I just wish I had the time to do all these things, but I don't. I want to try and figure out a more strategic plan moving forward, how to bring characters to life. And even if it's not in TV and movies, still getting them in printed form. And so like Evel, I can say this. So I have a character, Evel 11, and I sort of describe her as like a female Jason Bourne, female soldier that's kind of in a Mad Max style world. She doesn't have any history or memory of her history. She takes it upon herself to protect this family, and it's kind of a space western. That's had interest from a producer in Hollywood. That we've been trying to bring the components for that. There's another one, Damian Moon, which is he's sort of what if James Bond were Doctor Strange. I also created him as a 16-year-old, and I've had a couple of interest from Hollywood producers on them, and there's other characters of mine, Marutek, which is a Mexican superhero based on a tribute to my late grandfather. And they've all had interest from Hollywood, but because of how things have gone, I'm trying to more focus on like, let's get these into comic form whether or
Yeah.
not it's a one shot or a mini series or a graphic novel, and get them out to an audience. And then of course, if the Hollywood thing does happen, I'll treat it more as a nice surprise. Because I
Yeah.
mean, I'm doing things differently, by the way. So for years, I used to announce things like if I got option, for anyone
Yeah.
in your audience that doesn't know what an option is, it's like a Hollywood entity comes to you and says, hey, I want to develop your thing as a movie or cartoon or whatever. Here's so many months, and we have the rights to do that. Now,
Yeah.
you'll see a lot of these announcements and stuff like Variety and Deadline Hollywood. Doesn't mean the thing's going to get made. In fact, took me a while to realize this too. Like probably over 90% of these announcements that are made, they don't ever come to light. So
Wow.
like all the TV shows and movies you see,
Yeah.
those are almost in a miraculous, like they're breathing rarefied air to even be there. So
Wow.
at least I've been optioned more than once. Black Alpha's been optioned 3 times now. And I
Wow.
was having talks with Netflix last year about all of my characters.
Yeah.
I still talk to people in that world behind the scenes.
Yeah.
I just don't share stuff anymore because
Right.
it is pretty disappointing when you're like, oh, it's going to happen. It's not going to happen over and over
Yeah.
again. So with that being said, I still am entertaining talks with people in the Hollywood world about what I'm doing, but I won't announce things until like there's something to show people. So,
Sure.
so for now, the thing I can be a little more part of being in control of is creating comics.
Sure.
Like I said,
Yeah.
not an easy thing, like I said
Yeah.
earlier, but a little more doable than trying to get and on a side note, I'm also planning on becoming a filmmaker myself.
Oh, how
So
cool.
it's never too late to start.
No way.
And I'm a
Yeah.
huge proponent of self-education. So I've been learning
Yeah.
some things, and I want to
Yeah.
hopefully next year do a couple of short films. And
Yeah.
because I've got all this crazy stuff going on. I actually got invited last year to audition for a movie.
Oh, wow.
There were some things that got derailed, and I'm hoping that opportunity is still there. But I figured if not, I'll create, because I'm actually thinking of doing 2 shorts where I actually act in the movie.
Yeah.
And it would be like my directing and demo reel for acting, because
Yeah.
it's about creating content. And I
Sure.
think that I want to be able to say I've got completed content, and if it means a short film over
Yeah.
here, a comic series over here, whatever it takes, that's, I
Yeah.
want to be a part. Even acting, that's something I wanted to do since the 90s, quite honestly, but I was too
Yeah.
shy.
Yeah.
And I've been able to, I'm represented. I have an agent out of Hollywood, and I'm trying to base roles more around my appearance.
Mm-hmm.
I have no illusions to being like an Oscar winner type actor. It would just be like, we need a pirate for this. We need a
Yeah.
knight.
Yeah.
We need a space bounty hunter, because
Yeah.
people have compared my appearance to like Jason Momoa. And so I
Yeah.
decided I'm going to like utilize that a little bit
Yeah.
and just figure out just have a blast making movies. And I don't care if they're B movies. I mean,
Yeah.
I think the
Yeah.
whole process of storytelling is amazing. I love
Yeah.
craptacular B movies just as much as I love like the prestige A-list or
Sure.
Oscar contenders, everything
Sure.
in between I love. So,
Mhm.
so those are some of the things that I have going on, and I'm excited about that because it really is about like steering your own ship as the captain
Yeah.
and realizing that, if certain things don't work out, don't take that as a sign. And trust me, I've
Yeah.
been tempted to say, okay, this is not going to work out. It's
Yeah.
not going to happen. And I'm learning to constantly circle around that and say, okay, let's keep moving. Circle
Yeah.
around that, let's keep moving. And so this filmmaker thing is a version of that, where I'm like, if I do a little 5-minute thing and
Yeah.
people get to view it, it's a completed short film. That
That's
would be
cool.
awesome.
Yeah. That's cool.
Same thing. And so, yeah, not everything has to be this big sort of, opus, this epic
Yeah.
to get done. So that's really, really, really invigorated my creative spirit, is to go getting a comic done. It's on its way. It had some bumps in the road. Even production on the Black Alpha comic had bumps I didn't foresee, but I'm like, but we're still doing it.
Still
That's really
doing
what
it.
matters. Yep.
Yeah. Well, that's
Um,
super awesome, Tom. That's incredible, man. I'm pulling for you, man. I hope you get that opportunity. That'd be amazing.
Well, I appreciate it. It would be
Yeah.
fun. It would be
It
fun
would.
to something to show my daughter too,
Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah.
But when you were talking about doing a crowdfunder too, like I know a lot of times crowdfunders don't always succeed.
Yeah.
There's a number of reasons behind that. It's not like there's a surefire formula, but I always enjoy seeing people go, okay, we didn't raise the funds, the crowdfund, but guess what?
Yeah.
I've got a plan B and C. We're going to
Absolutely.
make it happen. And that's really
Yeah.
what I love to see. And it's inspiring back and forth, to let
Yeah.
people know, because I can be reminded of that too. Like,
Sure.
yeah, you're having a rough day, blue day. Look what this person's doing. So
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah. If it's a passion and you're really serious about it, I mean, I think that's the attitude you have to have, right?
yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
I mean, because I equate it to, like, trust me, I've had a number of times through the years where I'm like, okay, this has been too much.
Yeah.
It's emotionally draining. What an emotional roller coaster. Maybe I'll live a normal life and join a dart league in the evenings, work
Yeah.
my job and be happy.
Exactly.
But every time I've tried to do that, and it's not been a lot, but it's been some, I'm like, I can't.
Yeah.
I can't. It's like not breathing for me if I take all the, and like, and I'm probably in a worse position because I'm like, this has been going on since I was 11 years old. And it's like, and it never stopped. There was never a lull in there, you know? So I'm like, so I can't, it's like, it's not being who I am if I really tried to do that. And that's why I said it's been tempting. And, but you know, everyone's they got to be beholden to their own path and their own selves. And I know for me, like I said, storytelling is my number one passion in life, you know, besides my love for my daughter. So
absolutely.
Those are the top two.
Yeah, those are a good top two, Tom.
Yeah, she's the top one, and you know, storytelling passion is right underneath that. So
yeah. Well, Tom, I can't tell you how grateful I am that you were able to join today. Really appreciate you walking us through your experience. What an amazing experience that you've had in comics. It sounds like almost film is coming next for you. You just accomplished so much. And, you know, the people that I've mentioned, like, hey, I get an opportunity to talk to Tom. They're like, oh my God, that guy's a legend in the industry. So I'm sure you already know, but a lot of people really appreciate everything that you've done in comics and around comics. And I'm a big fan. I cannot wait for Black Alpha 2 and the 4-part series being done. If there's anything that I could do, at least just to pump it up, I'll throw it all over my channels. And we want to make sure that you have everything you need to finish that story, because I think a lot of people want to hear that story be fulfilled.
Well, I appreciate that. And I could already tell, like when you and I just connected over the last week or two before this podcast, I have a new friend.
Absolutely, Tom. I really appreciate
immediate friendship. So
yeah. No, we need those in the industry, and I certainly look up to you, and I really appreciate you being open to being on the show. And like you said, even outside of this show, man, I hope we can still connect. I think you're an amazing human being, and I really appreciate it, Tom. Thank you for joining today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, Tom. Thanks again.
Thanks.